Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Cranked and Ranked. I'm Steven, old head on the YouTubes, and here with Mr. Eddie Sparks. And as we are usually doing it here, we're going to be jumping into another band's discography and ranking their albums. And if you've seen the title of this episode, you already know. Today, we are going to be jumping into the discography of Faith No More. So today is going to be part one of this, because even though we're only dealing with 7 albums here, we are going to be talking about a band that is a favorite of both Eddie and me, one of our favorite bands. So I have a feeling we're going to get pretty long-winded. So strap in and get set because we're going to talk a lot, I'm sure. So today is going to be number 7 through number 4, and then next episode will be the top 3. So anything you want to say before we get started, sir?
Yeah, I just wanted to, kind of add to that, saying, once again, much like the Ugly Kid Joe episode, this is, the second episode in a row where we've covered some favorite bands of both of ours. But this in particular is one of my top 3. My top 3 bands are Metallica, Faith No More, and Ugly Kid Joe. And I want it duly noted, I don't hate any records on this list. Like we've said before, it's not necessarily worst to best as it is least favorite to favorite. Because I feel like, worst is doing a disservice to whoever's at the bottom if it's a good discography. So yeah, but I do have some hotter takes. I do have some hotter takes on this one than I do on the previous episode, though.
Okay, and that's the thing that's interesting about doing these, is because when you're trying to rank things, when the majority of it are albums that you love, then you really got to start picking things apart and being realistic about these things. And so that's what makes this interesting. And so let's just go ahead and dive right into it with number 7. And Eddie, as usual, you're taking the lead here. So let's hear your number 7 Faith No More album.
Okay, so my top 3 was a lot easier than my bottom 4. So this episode was quite the how do I put it? It really made me think about where I was putting everything. And the hardest part for me in all of this was finding out which was going to be 3 and which was going to be 4. But we're at number 7, so I'm going to go with my least favorite of their discography. And it's even still a good album. I've gone for Album of the Year.
Wow, okay, cool.
I've chose it because it's the last of their original run. You can tell on certain tracks that their hearts aren't fully into it. Regardless, it's still a good album considering it's considered, kind of the point at which the band had kind of checked out a little bit, in varying degrees from member to member. But right off the bat, I'll tell you one thing. Roddy Bottum is back. He is he's present on this album in contrast to King for a Day, where he is there but not nearly as much as any of the other albums. So I'm going to go right into the track by track. We've got Collision. Considering the previous album lacked keys at some points, he's here right off the bat on this one. Like, the riff is really heavy. It's a great way to open the record.
Yeah, it is that is a killer opening track. It's like grabs you from the beginning.
Definitely. And it kind of continues that Faith No More tradition of opening the record with this, punch right in the face. Because I think, all of their records since Introduce Yourself go bam with everything out of the gate,
except one.
Yeah, except one.
except the newest one. We'll get to that.
Yeah, we will. And this album's an interesting one because the band this was obviously the most modern sounding one that they'd done throughout their career. It would make sense. It was 1997, and the production on it is very, you can tell it's like more of a computer digital kind of affair than their previous records, which leads me directly into track 2 with Strip Search. Influenced by the booming trip-hop scene of the 90s, this is one of the most atmospheric songs the band has ever crafted, and in my opinion, also one of the best. Those drum machine parts and like synthesizers on this song add a completely new dimension to their sound, and that I've never been able to unhear it. Those like string parts at the end where it's like dun dun da 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 dun dun da da.
Yeah.
Those like that someone said it sounds like Metal Gear Solid, and I've never been able to unhear it. The you've been discovered noise. But yeah, good luck unhearing that now.
Yeah. Also, that track, for me, the standout of that track is the bass guitar, the bass line that plays during it. It's real. It's pretty funky, but like in a kind of a smooth, kind of busy kind of way. But it's every time I hear that song, I'm like, man, the bass is so good in this.
Oh, for sure. I would argue that Bill's bass is almost like the heart of the band, because he's holding down not only a rhythmic thing, but playing melodies in there, and it's just he's a really cool bass player that adds such a unique spin to it. Because like we said, I think it was the last episode, we said Faith No More are not a funk metal band. The only real element of that is Bill Gould's bass playing, but it's very, I've heard it said as well that the heart of Faith No More really as a whole is Roddy's keyboards, Borden's drumming, and Bill Gould's bass. Those three elements, the boom boom gat boom boom gat, like kind of rhythms and stuff in there, which funnily enough aren't as present on this album, and that's why I put it at the bottom of the list, because it feels like the least Faith No More album.
Okay.
They kind of shed a lot of their original skin on this record, which ironically brings me to probably one of the most Faith No More tracks on this record, with Last Cup of Sorrow. It's not a standout track to me, to be honest, but the chorus really opens up and has a really cool 90s grunge vibe meshed with some like cinematic strings and twinkly keyboards in there too.
That song reminds me a little bit like when Mike Patton put out that Peeping Tom album.
Yes.
And he referred to it as his attempt of making radio music or pop music.
Yeah.
Last Cup of Sorrow reminds me of them kind of trying to craft a single. Like if they were going to do a radio friendly song, it almost feels like it's got a classic sort of, you can just play this on the radio kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, it's very accessible considering some of the other tracks on this record. And this is flowing really nicely, which brings me to the before kind of ahead of its time track, Naked in Front of the Computer.
Yeah.
Heavy track, always welcome here on Cranked and Ranked. Nice heavy groove. That down, so fucking good.
And from what I read, that song was completely written by Mike Patton. That's a Mike Patton song.
Yeah, that is a Patton song, and there's something to be said for Patton's writing ability, because he has so many side projects outside of Faith No that sound nothing like Faith No More.
Yeah.
And he's incredibly diverse, and leads me to believe that he is not actually human. He's some kind of possessed alien that landed here and made some kick-ass tunes. But yeah, and then you've got Helpless, which is kind of this like mellow developing track, complete with an acoustic guitar, which isn't something we often get from Faith No More. So, and it's also one of those grower tracks that, I've grown to appreciate more as time's gone by with more listens. Because when I first got into Faith No More, I was a Real Thing and Angel Dust guy, and I didn't really care for the direction they went down on the next few records. This was before Sole Invictus as well, so
Okay.
King for a Day and this album were the only two. But these two albums really grew on me, King for a Day and Ashes to Ashes. Not Album of the Year, yeah. I always call it Ashes to Ashes because that's my favorite song from this album.
Mine too. I was about to say.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
But yeah, then you got Mouth to Mouth, which almost, it gives me kind of almost Bungle vibes, almost like Mr. Bungle with that kind of, that kind of Eastern thing over the top with that cool thing on the keyboard with that really heavy, groovy thing going on. And
the vibe of that song kind of reminds me of Be Aggressive also. They seem like similar songs.
Yeah, I get that. It's got that same kind of, I don't know whether or not swagger would that be a good way to describe it? It's got that kind of,
I guess so,
off-kilter kind of up-tempo, but not quite.
It's kind of an odd...
Yeah.
It has an odd energy to it. I don't know. It's hard to describe a lot of their stuff. I've learned.
Yeah, they really are. They are just one of those bands that just sounds like them. There aren't any bands, to my knowledge, that sound like Faith No More. They might have influence and like elements, but there really is something about the five guys in Faith No More that just make this such unique stuff.
Yeah.
And then, bada bing, bada boom, we end up at Ashes to Ashes. One of the best choruses they ever wrote.
It's the whole song is just really well put together, and it's just it's a pretty perfect song.
Yeah, I would go as far as to say this is the best song on the album.
I wouldn't disagree.
Nice. And then you've got She Loves Me Not, a lounge song, a genre that Faith No More somehow pulls off, and they've never limited themselves, but it never ceases to amaze me that the same band that wrote Surprise You're Dead wrote She Loves Me Not,
Yeah.
And again, it's not a standout, but I've grown to appreciate this album as time's gone on. It's kind of aged like a fine wine for me. It was a bit of an acquired taste, but I got there in the end. And and then the one I feel that is a little bit underrated. I've heard some people dogging on Got That Feeling, which I feel is kind of this like crazy burst of chaotic metal, again with that almost Mr. Bungle edge to it. I feel like Patton's weirdness.
That's what I was going to say. Like there's not only with him, there's enough odd elements in that song that just to where like sometimes I forget about another part of the song because like you immediately because the title has Got That Feeling, you immediately think of Got That Feeling, but then you go to there's two other parts that are very different that it goes into, and the sort of odd time signature rhythmic part that comes after the chorus. I don't even know what you would call it, but the with all the stops and starts and stuff, and then the way that they bring out those two panned Patton vocals in either speaker doing the little chanting part. It's just like so when they are on, they're really fucking on, and they know how to make these decisions where it's like we already have this song, but we are adding these little tweaks and little pieces of either in the songwriting or in the production. It just makes all of the little things kind of stand out in a way that I think if somebody else had done a song like that, it wouldn't have had the same qualities. It's just so unique.
Yeah, like I say, there really is something about those guys just making the music that they do, because they know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that it's almost like they've got a formula, but they never end up with the same result.
Yeah, it's odd to think that even though you could make a case for, especially on this album, them kind of feeling like they had to write certain types of songs. Like,
Yeah.
here's the kind of chaotic rocker. Here's the lounge song. Here's the, but really, if you take those songs apart, it's still way better than most fucking music out there. So it's
Yeah.
it's even pulling it apart. It's still like, yeah, this is it's just them living up to their own high standard that they created themselves. That's the problem, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's they really have, like, they evolved. They evolved, but they always kept this like core feeling to the band that's kind of always been there. And I feel like of all the albums, this is the one where it's most absent, but still they've got that real thinking outside of the box element to them that still makes it very much a Faith No More album.
Yeah.
And then you get tracks like Paths of Glory, which I would say is, one of the moodier tracks, which relies on that core element of Faith No More, the drums, bass, and keyboard, and with the guitar and vocals providing ornamental qualities around that. And then you get the song that Podcast Croissant loves to hate on, Homesick Home.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because, this kind of woozy, drowsy, hungover feeling, about to throw up kind of song. Clocks in at just under 2 minutes, and in my opinion, it is one of the worst tracks they've done, in my opinion, because it feels unfinished to me. It feels like they had this demo and they needed a 12th track in the running order, and they put it at number 11, and it just feels like a demo that wasn't finished but slapped on the album regardless.
I mean, you could make the argument that this album does feel like a collection of, well, here's what we got. Some of it's great, some of it's pretty good. It feels like it's the least album feeling of all their albums. Like, it almost just feels like a collection of tracks that could have been written at different points in the band, and then they just recorded them all at the same time, just because they obviously sonically have the same sound. But yeah, it does have that quality of, not fully baked. Not all the songs, were cooked as long as they needed to be cooked.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you take a pizza out of the oven and, like, the center hasn't quite got as crusty as the outside.
Oh yeah, that's actually a pretty good analogy for this album, because it's like you could eat the outside part of the pizza and it's pretty fucking good. You get to the middle and you're like, well, it's still pizza, so I think I'm just gonna go ahead and eat it.
Ladies and gentlemen, album of the year, the pizza album, out now.
Pizza of the year.
And then finally we get Christina. Now, this song, I didn't like this song when I first heard it, because I thought, they kind of just play one note for most of it, like, open E.
Yeah.
Open E. And it's like, and then eventually, as I kind of matured as a music listener, I began to think of it less of a song and more of a piece. And now, as I've gotten really into Doom recently, the actual metal genre, not the game. I've been playing the game for too long now. And I have been loving just these 12-minute opuses of just really sitting back on this slow vibe and just letting it kind of envelop you.
Yeah.
And I feel like I didn't give this song nearly enough credit before I really grew to like it, and it feels like a nice swan song for their, like, first phase of their career, because this was the last song on their last album before they broke up. So
Yeah.
it was almost like this bittersweet credits rolling.
Absolutely. That's what I was
kind
going to
of
say.
feel.
It feels like a closing credits song, like a song that plays when your heroes are walking off into the sunset and you don't know what's going to happen at that point. You just know the movie is over. And
Yeah.
so it does have that quality. It's not one of my favorites either, but as an album closer, it has a good closing quality to it that
Yeah.
I like that part of it, especially once the chorus part kind of really kicks in and it opens up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a little, I guess bittersweet is the right word for that.
Yeah, and I'd say in closing that I think Faith No More are one of the bands people should look to when it comes to closing your album, because they've got some great final tracks
Totally.
on their records. You know, you've got obviously this one, you've got Midnight Cowboy leading into Easy, which is the perfect way to end Angel Dust. And then you've got Just a Man, which is on King for a Day, which is a magnificent song. But that is my number 7. As you can tell, we gushed a lot about the worst ones, so this is going to be a hell of an episode.
Yeah. So let's just jump right in then. So my number 7 is the most recent album, the 2015 album Sole Invictus.
Ooh.
And
okay.
So for a little bit of background with me, I got into Faith No More in it had to have been 1990, because I know that The Real Thing came out in 89, but they didn't release the video for Epic until 1990. And as soon as that fucker came out, I was a fan and have been a fan ever since. And so when Sole Invictus was coming out, it was very anticipated from me. One of my favorite bands finally returning. This was their first album in 18 years.
Which is insane.
Yeah, and the first little nugget that you got off of this album made me completely excited, because it was the song Motherfucker, which not only...
Motherfucker on the phone.
Yeah. So not only is it an odd song to release as a first single, Mike Patton is not the main vocalist on it. It's Roddy Bottum that does the vocals on it. And it's such a weird, hard to describe song, but it's got this vibe to it that it's just so great. So I remember when that song came out, all these people were like, this doesn't sound like Faith No More. This is going to suck. And I'm just like, I like that this isn't what I expected. This is so weird. And at the same time, along with it, you're always doing the get the motherfucker on the phone. You're always doing that.
Yeah.
And so then the album came out. And by the way, just for those of you who don't know the history of the band, the album that we were just talking about in 1997 has the same lineup as this album, which came out in 2015. So, like I said with the Ugly Kid Joe episode, it's always very I don't know what the word is. It makes you feel better about what you're going to get, because the whole band decided to come back on board for whatever it is they were working on.
Yeah.
So that's great. So the one thing that I would have to say after, I first listened to the whole album was the feeling that I kept thinking to myself, you know what? I really like this album, but I really wanted to love it, and I didn't. I just really liked it. And because it's a very solid album, and it's a super respectable return from a band. I can't shit on it at all for that. For an 18-year gap, it's pretty damn good. And when I listened to it recently, it really gave me the same sort of feeling. And for a little while, I was thinking to myself, well, I'm putting it at the end of my list because I haven't had enough time with it yet. But it's now been 5 years, and I still wish it was better. So really, I guess that's why it ends up here. Overall, it just seems a lot less adventurous than all of their other albums. Even Album of the Year had some odd tracks that you had to kind of wrap your head around. This one doesn't, although they do have a good variety of songs. But fewer of them are memorable. Like I'll go and look at the track listing off this album, and some of the songs I'll forget what they sounded like because they just don't have a memorable quality. And the big thing is every single Faith No More album has a different experience. It gives you a different experience of the Faith No More thing. This one seems very similar to it may not be exactly similar to any particular album, but it almost just feels like it's kind of what you expected. It's not surprising.
Yeah.
And every single Faith No More album up until I guess album of the year, it always just filled me with this level of excitement the first time I heard it. And this one didn't. And so, and I know that the dudes are older and it's a different vibe, and that's fine. But I guess I just wish that it wasn't so familiar sounding. Like I want to be challenged by their music.
Yeah.
And
it
and
does kind of, sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it does feel very much like they picked up where they left off.
Sure. With album of the year, I would, it seems very closely related. And the production itself to me is a little weak, which is interesting because not only was it produced by Billy Gould, but it was mixed by Matt Wallace, who did all of their early shit that sounds fucking amazing to me. But overall, this is an album that the mix of it is very uneven to where you crank it up and it seems like some things are too loud and other things are not loud enough. Sometimes the guitars are too soft. Sometimes the vocals are too soft. Sometimes it's real minute things, but it's just one of those things where I never really enjoy listening to it because I can't get comfortable in it. It feels like something wasn't completely smoothed out in the mix. And I'm going to go ahead and say this here. I don't think this is an unpopular opinion, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. I'm not a John Hudson fan. No. I think that his guitar playing has absolutely no character in it. And I think they need a better guitar player. I'm sure he's a great dude, but even if you watch them on stage, he has nothing going on. He is just a dude that plays the guitar. He could be a studio hire that came in and played stuff. So now he's perfectly respectable as a guitar player. He can do the shit, but there's something that's not there. There's a character that's not there. It's almost like you have Faith No More and then a guitar that's just kind of there to add guitar to the songs.
Yeah, I would kind of echo that statement because, you went from having Jim Martin, which was, a very recognizable figure in the band,
And his sound was very recognizable.
Yeah, he both looked and sounded, metal. He was the metal guy in Faith No More.
And then for one album, we get Trace Bruance for one album. And so... which that guy fucking rules too. I don't necessarily think he has as much. That album has as much guitar character as all the Jim Martin stuff. But yeah, so the John Hudson thing, I don't know. He's fine. I just wish it was better. I wish he was better. I wish this album was better. But once again, we are talking about an album from one of our favorite bands, and this is still an album that I think is really good. Yeah. And like I say a lot, if this album was somebody's entry point into Faith No More, I'd be like, cool, that's great place to start. Now move backwards or something,
Yeah.
So overall, that's why it comes here at number 7, because it's honestly, out of all the albums, the one that I have the most to gripe about.
Yeah, and I feel like for me, it did take a lot of repeat listens for things to grow on me, because at points, it does feel like Album of the Year Part 2 in some ways, although I will say I do think the sound of the record is more organic. They do use a lot more live instruments like acoustic guitars and live pianos and things. I'd say
also maybe this is just in my brain and this is how I'm perceiving it, but it seems like a lot of Roddy Bottom, the keyboard player. Why am I spacing?
That's Roddy Bottom.
Oh, it is Roddy Bottom. Yeah, oh yeah, you're right. Billy Gould's the bass player. God, I'm really bad with names normally, and and then even with my favorite bands, I'll sometimes space on somebody's name. But his keyboard playing for the most part seems really classic piano sounding heavy on this album. I don't really think I hear a lot of synthesized sort of unnatural sounding sounds. It seems like it's a lot of piano on this one.
Yeah, I feel like the only one that's got any glaring kind of I'd say separation anxiety would probably be the standout for something.
You're right. You're right.
There's a lot of synth pad work on that one, but aside from that, yeah, I would agree. You know, most of the album is live piano, or yeah, it is a very organic sounding album, but I do get being underwhelmed by it.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, that's my take on it. So let's move on. Number 6.
Cool. On the complete flip side of organic, we have the extremely synth heavy We Care a Lot from 1985.
I was so ready for this to be your number 7, so I'm glad it's not. But yeah, let's jump into it.
It does surprise me you'd think that, because I have a major 80s bias, but in this particular case, Faith No More doesn't really apply to that kind of ballpark. So to hear them doing pretty much a new wave album is kind of an odd listen. So right off the bat, this album is very, very 80s in both pretty much from a production standpoint. They were using all of the tricks of the day, that tight gated reverb on the drums. You had very fizzy synth patch choices from Roddy at the time. Major post-punk new wave influence dripping off of this disc, and they're still kind of finding their feet here. A lot of people tend to refer to this as kind of a glorified demo, because a lot of people consider Introduce Yourself to be the true debut of Faith No More for some reason. I don't know why. That's just some kind of opinion.
I guess I understand that, but I also don't agree with that, because I think this album stands on its own.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would agree. And beginning right off of the bat, this is the only place where I would turn around and say, yeah, this is a demo version, is the opening track, the title track, We Care a Lot. The original version of a great song that was improved much, much better on the next record. But
I have to stop you there, because this now goes against your rule of bands covering their own songs.
Now, I must preface this. I have a problem with bands re-recording their songs like 30 plus years later when they can't play it as well as they did back in the day. But like I suppose my most hypocritical thing for me would be the Whitesnake Here I Go Again re-recording being my preferred version of that song, because I feel like it's just got more balls, I
mean, sometimes there are improvements in songs, but I would agree that the We Care a Lot version on Introduce Yourself is much better. It's a little bit faster. I feel like there's a lot more energy to it. It feels like more of a peppy kind of song, whereas on We Care a Lot, it's weird. It seems a bit plodding, like it doesn't quite connect.
And like, the lyrics are a little bit different, and they don't quite fit as well. And it's okay, but it does lack the punch of the later version from Introduce Yourself. And then you finish that one up, and then you get track 2, which is called A Lesson in How to Overuse Reverse Reverb. Now, this song's called The Jungle, and it basically begins with Chuck Mosley yelling into a reverse reverb, and it's like, Father, you Lord, try to see. I I haven't even mentioned, Chuck Mosley is the singer on this album, and he has a completely different vibe to Mike Patton. The Faith No More with Chuck and the Faith No More with Patton might as well be two different bands, because the band with Chuck was still very punky and new wave kind of, with a real kind of punk edge to it, because Chuck knew he was no Patton, and he had pretty much one setting, and that was Chuck mode, because he doesn't sound like anyone else. And initially I thought, that this guy kind of sucks, but then I realized as time went on, actually no, he's got his own character, and there's something beautiful in that, because he really didn't give a flying fuck. He just wanted to simply make stuff with the band, and he was such a character, and he had his way of doing it. And I'd say a big eye opener into his character is the episode of Podcast Croissant where they interview a guy called Doug Esper. He toured with Chuck, and he was one of his best friends. They met up in the mid 90s or something, and they had a great relationship all the way up until he passed away tragically. But rip Chuck. But this album, it's not as good as the other Chuck albums, so I'm going to kind of lay into this one.
Okay.
Again, it's a Faith No More album, so obviously I like it. But you get to track 3, you've got Mark Bowen. It's a cool song that really opens up and allows Mosley's unique vocals to yell atop it, and it certainly is a vibe unto itself, this album, because it's Faith No More, but it feels so 80s that it's almost weird to think of that. Because when I think of Faith No More, I think 90s. I get 90s vibes from Faith No More.
This is legit right in the center of the 80s, 1985 with this one, I believe. Yeah.
And even on 1987, even in Introduce Yourself, I get those 90s vibes. I don't get 90s vibes from this album one bit, because it's like you say.
I do feel like the Chuck Mosley thing with this band on this particular album, it works. To me, it works really well, because I feel like at this particular time, all of these individuals in Faith No More were all chaotic individuals.
Yes.
They all kind of had this weird, didn't quite fit together, but because of that, they absolutely fit together. And it was sort of but I feel like as the band moved on, even on Introduce Yourself, and then definitely once they leaped over to doing stuff for The Real Thing, the rest of the band seems like they learned how to control the chaos. Yeah. Where I feel like Chuck Mosley was a guy where his shit was never going to be controlled. Yeah. I feel like he's just a dude that was going to be him, and may have even gotten weirder down the line, to where it would have been maybe some completely unlistenable stuff. I mean, you don't know. So I feel like that's why it worked in the beginning, and then it didn't, because I feel like they were the kind of guys that were really trying to rein it in, and he was a dude that couldn't be reined in. So
yeah, I think I remember reading a story in Small Victories, the Faith No More biography, and there's a story about how Jim broke his hand punching Chuck in the face because they had a fight, and they had to I think he had to play a gig with a broken hand because he just fucking nailed Chuck right in the face. But
I can see that.
Yeah. But yeah, talking about Jim, which brings us to track 4, we get this pretty little classical guitar interlude, which, on any other album, I suppose pretty acoustic interludes are big on kind of 80s metal albums, just to show off hey, we can play this too.
Yeah.
But this one on here starts humorously with Chuck and Jim exchanging some stern words at the start. You can hear them in the background going, "Don't blow it, Jim." And what? I'll blow it all fucking night. It's just like, and then just plays this really peaceful thing. And I'd say if it comes to highlights on this record, for me, Why Do You Bother is one of them. I love that really dark piano and synth thing. The vibe really, really does work on this song. And again, going against my initial claim about not liking re-recordings, if it improves on the quality, which is rare, I would have liked to have seen a more updated version of this. But then again, I feel like they nailed it on this record. So, like I say, Roddy's keys are really what makes this song. The atmosphere that he creates is something else. I will say, if there's one main criticism I have about this record as a whole, it feels like Mike Bordin found his Mike Bordin beat and played that beat on every song. You know, because he kind of found like, and he would develop it as time would go on, and then he's a very recognizable drummer, but on here, it's very much a case of, I'm not going to play like any traditional fucking rock beat. I'm just going to tom-tom snare, tom-tom snare, tom-tom snare, tom-tom snare.
It's almost like a lot of times he's like, you know what, everyone likes using those cymbal things. I ain't going to use none of those.
Yeah. And it's like the only cymbal he does use is his left foot for the hi-hat, and that's about it, with the occasional bash of the crash, but that's about it. Again, you know, using that beat again is greed with this like fun 80s syncopation thing going on. And then in Pills for Breakfast you get it again, but slowed down with one of my favorite Faith No More riffs actually is Pills for Breakfast. That like you know, they really let Jim take the reins on that one. It's one of the most, it's up until the next album, pretty much. It's the chuggiest thing they had, and I think it's a really cool 2-minute instrumental. And then you get to what I would consider probably like their finest work on the album with As the Worm Turns. You know, this song here, it's my favorite track on the record. It aged really well, and it played they played it a lot in the Patton era as well, you know. And even the re-recording that they did with Patton, you know, again, I actually like when Faith No More re-records it in a different era, because they'll bring, it's almost like another band covering the song rather than the band re-recording their own stuff, because they're in a very different headspace at that point. Most notably with Roddy's like record scratch samples, which sound exactly like the year of 1992. But yeah, it's, you know, As the Worm Turns, favorite track on the record, love it. Then you get Arabian Disco, you know, that lovely 80s synth going on, love that. I'd say, in my opinion, this album has the weakest ending track of any Faith No More album. I feel like this song, New Beginnings, kind of fizzles out a little bit.
Yeah.
It doesn't jump out to me much. But yeah, it's an underwhelming album closer. I don't hate it, but it's not my favorite. And that's all I have to say about that.
All right. I mean, I have some things to say about that album, but we will get to that later, because that is not my number 6 album.
Oh.
My number 6 album is Album of the Year from 1997. So we already talked about this one, so I'll be kind of quick here. So this one was the last one before the hiatus, and we've kind of spoke about this. It's an album that took a bit of time to grow on me. When I first bought the album, so this is the one that follows King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime, which is an album that I love. And so I was, you know, at this point, you know, still a Faith No More fanatic. I was very much into whatever they were doing. And so this was a big deal when this album came out. And when I believe when it was first released in '97, nobody knew that there was kind of a bowing out kind of progress happening with the band.
Yeah.
Because I mean, obviously they did a tour for this album, but so when you first heard it, you didn't have that context behind it.
Yeah.
Now listening to the album, you can hear that, oh, okay, it sounds like they weren't all 100% into this. And it sounds like an album from a band that needs to take a little break. And so,
Yeah.
but while still being really good, it's one of those albums that the more you listen to it, the really great tracks kind of reveal themselves to you the more that you listen to it. And so that's the biggest gripe with this one, is that the things that I love are track related as opposed to as an album as a whole. I mentioned this earlier that every album prior to this, since I discovered them with The Real Thing, had been an album that gave me a different experience, but on top of that, it immediately excited me and challenged me, and it was exhilarating listening to it. Whereas Album of the Year was more like I mean I like this, I like these guys, the songs are good, okay, it's a good album.
Yeah.
But there's a feeling of urgency that's missing from this album. Overall, like I said, there are standout tracks. We talked about Ashes to Ashes, which is one of my favorite Faith No More songs. But yeah, overall, like it does, with hindsight, feel like an album that was kind of like that. This is all the gas that was left in the tank, and it wasn't enough to really get them across the finish line quickly. It was more of a limping across the finish line once they finished the album. But yeah, it's got a lot of good shit on it. But listening to it among other Faith No More stuff, really, its inconsistencies and its ugly parts really start to kind of show through.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, we can move on because we already talked about this one. But yeah, my number 6 album of the year.
Cool. Okay, so for my number 5, I've gone with 2015's Sole Invictus.
All right.
Now, like you said, I mean, we've already kind of covered this one, so I've got a few track by track things, but I'll try to keep it succinct. So it's a comeback album and a pretty darn good one. A lot of lesser bands would kill to have an album with such good songs, but my main gripe is that it sounds very much like the band picked up where they left off, and it's almost like the least surprising album in their catalog. It doesn't, aside from all of the live instruments, it does feel like an album of the year part 2. But it does have a lot more enthusiasm, I feel, than album of the year. And like you say, with that kind of context, I will say the one thing that did catch me off guard, Sole Invictus, the opening track, in stark contrast to previous albums, this opens the album on a more mysterious note to the more energetic album openers they'd opted for since Introduce Yourself. It's a cool, moody track, and that peace ain't coming my way. I love that. I love this different take they did on opening the record, and in my opinion, it's a really strong side A and a weaker side B. Superhero is one of my favorite Faith No More songs. I was really impressed when I heard this. It's almost like, okay, they teased us and now they're back. It fucking ace song. Those keyboards over the top of that, like chugging metal, that dun 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 dun. Really, when it really opens up and has those kind of Eastern kind of scales in there, and it's just such a cool cool moody track. Oh, sorry, I read the wrong bit. It's then again, I'm not wrong. It's a very moody track. So
Well, yeah, I was going to say that especially once you get to the chorus, because it does have it changes up the vibe, because the verses are all very rockin' and energetic.
Yeah.
And then it totally opens up, and instead of having this sort of, I don't know, like a plateau or whatever, it's repetitive, and it's interesting, the choice of just having the leader of me like over and over again, basically.
Yeah.
It's almost like the song gets kind of stuck for a minute and then breaks out of it again when we go back into the verse.
It's almost like a thrash song and a doom song at the same time, because you know, it goes from like did again and then again ding 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 ding. I love this song. I could listen to this song on repeat.
Matt, my only gripe about this song is I feel like the choice at the end to keep the chorus going, but then do it in two different keys. How they do it one key and then do it another one, because at that point it gets so repetitive. I'm like, all right, that way we need to fade this fucker out.
Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's a chugging metal Faith No More song with a dose of Patton's madness sprinkled in there too for good measure. You need the go 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 go.
That's the shit. Yeah. I love it when he does that shit. When he just adds in, like I said before, on these little sprinkles of things happening in different, like if you're in headphones, on the different sides of the song, and it adds like a weird rhythm to it. Like that's like one of the things that's so great about what Mike Patton does is he can be a crooner and deliver some real soulful and passionate vocals, but he can also do a thing where his voice creates a rhythm of its own, like he's fucking Bobby McFerrin or some shit. Like he's just like that. The very I don't remember the name of the song, the last song on California by Mr. Bungle. And he does that thing, and I'm always like, that fucking rules. But he can pull off that shit.
It's such a gnarly thing too, because it's almost like his voice is another instrument. You know, you've got singers, and then you've got eccentric fuckers like Mike Patton that will come up with shit like that, and it's like, what other singer would think to go like like what? It's awesome.
But mad genius.
That's for the Mr. Bungle episode.
Yeah.
So yeah. Where was I? Oh, okay, here we go. With Sunny Side Up. Weirdest track so far. You know, it's harnessing their lounge tendencies, but they managed to provide us with this silly yet still pretty fantastically put together track, which adds more depth to an already moody record. And it feels like this kind of... It almost feels like RV. It's very sleazy. It's almost... Yeah, it's that kind of vibe. You know, not... I wouldn't say as extreme out of left field as RV, because RV is pretty fucking out there, but Sunny Side Up, not the only way to fry an egg. I just love
that song's got a good vibe to it. I really like how it sounds.
And it's that kind of, I feel like they kind of rekindled that like half goofy, half serious vibe that I feel that was absent a little bit on the previous record.
Yeah.
And it's like, they have this capacity to write such great music, but they somehow don't take it seriously, but take it seriously. And they're not afraid to sprinkle it with a little bit of a cheeky grin. But yeah, on the flip side, Separation Anxiety is spooky as fuck, you know.
Yeah.
This is probably the most classic sounding Faith No More track since at least King for a Day, because it has an almost Angel Dust vibe with that with all the spooky shit going on around it. And you know, whether or not that was intentional is up for debate. You know, they very often just find a vibe and sit on it for an album while doing wildly different things with it. But I feel like this really captures like that old school Faith No More feel, you know, especially with that like booga digga digga black digga digga booga booga digga black. You know, Borden is back on that full on tom work on this song. And then you get Cone of Shame, which is also one of my favorites on the album. You get this kind of spaghetti western with a breakdown kind of feel. It's got that. It's just such a cool thing. And to hear Patton's voice in like that kind of like, and its hold and its breath, like to hear him go really low is always cool. Because, the first time.
I always like the way that he enunciates the line in chalk.
Yeah. That always gets like a grin out of me because I'm like, yeah, you've gone for a real dramatic vibe on this delivery. And it, to see how far Patton has come as a vocalist, because when you think on The Real Thing, he pretty much has one voice, and that's the, kind of kind of thing going on. And then you get Angel Dust, and all of a sudden that's fucking gone, and it's just another one of his millions of voices that he somehow managed to harness in such a short space of time. Like, what an insane leap to make.
And
vocally.
So I think we discussed this on the 1989 episode where we were talking about Mike Patton, and I was referring to the fact that his vocal ability reminds me of like a seasoned veteran actor. That as they get older, they're so comfortable in how fucking good they are that everything is believable. And I think that's what Mike Patton has become. He's become this guy that he can kind of do whatever he wants, and there's a confidence to it that he could explain any bizarre idea he had, and his fans would all be like, well, yeah, of course. Yeah. Of course, we're with you. Because you kind of trust that he is going to deliver. So it's
for sure
pretty cool.
Yeah. Definitely, Patton is one of those vocalists that if you go up next to in a singing contest, you are fucked, because no matter what you pick, he's going to do a great job. The dude can croon, scream, growl, rap. The dude can do it all, and his range is insane. I'm not saying that there aren't other people like that, but he is an out there. And he's pretty high up on that versatility scale.
Sure.
For like insanely good. And then we get to side B, and that brings us to Rise of the Fall. Now, this is an underrated track in my honest opinion. I love the feel of this song. They really played with a more acoustic and live instruments on this record, and I feel like this is the song where they really pulled that off. On the flip side, Black Friday is one of my least favorite tracks in their catalog. Like, there really is something about that, like 1, 2, what you gonna do, that really rubs me the wrong way.
Even the way he pronounces it almost sounds like maybe it's supposed to be taking the piss or something like that, because it sounds very like he's being ironic or something, but it doesn't come across very good. Like it's a bad opening to that song, because you just go, who the fuck wrote these lyrics?
Yeah. And it's like, I think that could be like one of the most generic things I've ever heard come out of his mouth. Like, I love Mike Patton and everything he does, don't get me wrong, but this song is definitely one I could live without easily,
It feels, and also not a lot happens in the song. Like it's a song that just kind of is there and then it's gone.
Yeah. It has that brief, like, kind of buy it, but it never really like goes anywhere.
Yeah.
And it had potential, and had it not pissed me off with its lyrics right off the get-go, I might have been a little fairer to it, but yeah, for some reason this song rubs me the wrong way, and it's a skipper. It's a skipper for me. Again though, Motherfucker, first song released from the album, and it's fronted primarily by Roddy.
I want him to do more vocals.
Yeah,
even if he just does this kind of style, I don't care. I like his delivery. I don't know what it is about it. It's cool.
Yeah, for sure. Like, Mike does this great anthemic chorus, the hello motherfucker.
Yeah.
I love cranking that in the car and just yelling it, you know.
Yeah.
It's that's definitely a highlight of the album. I will hand it to them on this track though. Like you say, this is nothing like they've ever made before. And that's exactly how Faith No More always operated. They always responded to their previous release with something completely different.
Yeah, if the whole album had that, it had made me react the way that song did, I would totally love this album. Because I was very much like, oh, all right, okay, I was not expecting this, you know.
It's because it subverts expectation, you know.
Yeah.
It's not what you expected, but it's good. And that's the key to what made so many Faith No More albums stand out. And I feel like I'd say half of this album did that for me, but the other half was forgettable.
There's also like a thing about this particular song too, the ending of it, once it does that little stop and then it comes in with the other guitar melody, and they're doing the chanting, the get the motherfucker on the phone. It almost gives me chills. It's so good. Like the song really like opens up there, and I'm just like, oh, this is really cool. And so, yeah, even now that we're talking about it, I'm like, man, I love that song. I wish I loved the album as much as I love that song.
I'd say this song, Cone of Shame, and Superhero, for me at least, are like the highlights of the record. Yeah. And then you've got some pretty good ones with Sunny Side Up and Separation Anxiety. And I feel like, and Sole Invictus as well. But like some of the tracks on side B, they lack a certain level of quality that these other tracks possess. And, Matador, I think Matador was the first kind of song from this album that they were playing, because they played it live in like 2012, I think. I remember them teasing it. And it's cool. It's got this like menacing yet uplifting kind of feel, but I couldn't really think of much to say really that hasn't already been said. But
it's one of those songs like I was referring to earlier, where when you first say the name, I have to think really hard to remember what it sounds like, and then I'm like, oh, okay, I remember now. It doesn't have a memorable quality that leaps out right away.
Exactly, and I will say, here's a track that I've heard some people kind of critique, but I actually really like it. From the Dead, it's a heartfelt and optimistic ending to a great, mature and moody album, and I feel like it kind of pulls you back up from kind of some of these more down, gloomy tracks, because it's major key, Back from the Dead, and I feel like it is a little bit on the nose with not Metallica, sorry, Faith No More's. What fucking band am I talking about? I feel like it is a little bit of an on the nose kind of, we're back, but I like that, Yeah,
it's also a pretty good closer for the album as well.
Yeah, aside from maybe a couple albums, I can't think of Faith No More album that doesn't have a strong closer apart from, I think, pretty much We Care a Lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the rest of them end on a pretty high note. But yeah, that's pretty much me wrapped up for Sole Invictus for my number 5.
Cool. Well, then we'll move on to my number 5. So now we've crossed the border into albums that I think are fucking amazing, and I have very little to gripe about.
We're in the banger zone, people. We're in the banger zone.
We've crossed over. So I do like there are. Yeah. I'll get there. So my my number 5 is We Care a Lot, the debut album from 1985.
Right on.
And which, funny enough, I always thought it was cool that I have an OG vinyl version of it, and on all of the credits, the band's name is listed as Faith Period No More Period. Yeah, and I always thought that was interesting. But so this album, this is a now 35-year-old album, and to me, it still sounds unique as fuck. Like even around that time in 85, I don't think I know of other music around that time that sounded like this. Like it had elements of other things for sure, but it's this weird post-punk fuck. It's fuck music. No, it's post-punk funk metal. It's like which doesn't make any sense, but makes absolute sense when you listen to it. And it's one of those things where these guys, I feel like they were forging an original vision right out of the gate. Yeah. Like I said before, I do feel that comes from the fact that they seemed like very different individuals who were very strange and unique characters who all came together finally, with this version of the band. I mean, you can read about the different people that came in and out of Faith No More. But when they solidified this lineup with Chuck Mosley on vocals and everything, I just feel like they were... I don't feel like this is a demo. I feel like they were ready to go and they had an idea of what they wanted to do. And as a debut album, it's really good. And the one thing that I like about this album, as opposed to every other Faith No More album, is this is the one that I feel has such an emphasis on the groove and the mood. Like those two things outweigh everything else. There is barely a chorus to be found anywhere on this album. It's all you get into a vibe with a song. And on top of that, whatever you think Chuck Mosley is going to do, he's not going to do that. Or or even more appropriately, if he does something that you kind of don't like, he will continue to do that. And I just think that it goes so well with the music because it perfectly fits. He is an oddball. The music they were making was like music for oddballs. And it's just so much fun to listen to. And I do feel like it's the most keyboard heavy of any album that they've done. But I think that's part of the charm of it is because I don't know, Roddy Bottum's stuff is just so unique and we'll talk about it later on, but when we get to albums where there's not as much of his odd keyboard shit on it, it just feels like something's missing. So this album is a blast all the way through for me. As a standout, we talked about As the Worm Turns. That song is so good. Just even this version is just... It has a quality to it that just like brings you into the song immediately. And I'm going to give kudos because I'm going to say it's probably Roddy Bottum that does it. Because that keyboard part, it's almost like it could fit in a horror movie, maybe.
Yeah.
It almost reminds me of something like back in the 80s, all of these movies where they had music done by Vangelis. Yeah, who was? It feels like it could have been. Maybe it's not Vangelis that I'm thinking of. Who's the group? Tangerine Dream. That's what it is. They were like a synthesizer kind of group that did soundtracks for movies, and the music was all very moody and a little bit creepy, but very synth heavy to the point where a lot of it was just synthesizers, and that's it. And so the keyboard riff, I guess you would say, on As the Worm Turns reminds me of that a lot. And so, really, as you've heard, I like this album a lot. I have no gripes about this album at all. And if my number 4 album didn't have a very special place in my heart, then this one would have been number 4.
Oh, wow.
For me. But my number 4, even though we'll get to it, it has qualities that would put it below this album. It has personal and emotional attachments that keep it at number 4. So that's why number 5 is We Care a Lot, which is a fucking killer debut album.
Yeah, I totally get that, dude. So for me, for my number 4,
man, we're already at number 4. We've made it over an hour just talking about our bottom 3 albums.
Wow,
Told you.
We did say, don't say we didn't warn you. Okay, so my number 4. Now, I want to just say this was incredibly hard for me. Yeah. Picking between, I knew what my top 2 were going to be, and I knew what my bottom 3 were going to be. But this middle 2, this this drove me fucking insane. This was honestly like being told, hey, you have to shoot one of your children. Which one do you pick? You know, yeah. It was just such a tricky thing for me, and I will have to reserve what I picked above it for the next episode, because I don't want to ruin any surprises. I want to keep the listener on their toes. So, I have chosen number 4. Introduce yourself.
Okay. All right.
Now, from this record onward, I'm pretty much vibing. I'm straight up vibing throughout, dude. I'm having a great time. These top 4, you know, they're varying degrees of perfect in my opinion. The Mosley era nails it on this one. The better of the 2 Mosley albums, with a much more satisfying production, especially. And I'm going to go straight into the track by track. We're wasting no time on Introduce Yourself, people.
I guess it's important to point out, since we're getting into these earlier albums, that Matt Wallace was the producer for 4 albums in a row. Right?
4, yeah.
4 albums in a row.
Yeah, because didn't he start off as well with a home studio in his parents' garage?
I think so, and it's interesting to listen to these albums, because not only are you hearing the band grow, but you're hearing him grow as a producer as well on top of it.
Oh, for sure, he was like a sixth member.
Yeah,
like he really helped nail what Faith No More would sound like, and there's no better example than Faster Disco. What a way to open this next album. You know, I can imagine being anyone who heard We Care a Lot when it first came out, that album, and then hearing this and thinking, wow, holy shit, you know, this is a step up. And this is the beginning of that trend where the band opens up their album with that burst of energy, you know, all the instruments at once, barring the vocals. It's one hell of an opener too, and it really shows off Mosley's uniqueness and like just willingness to make weird noises, much like Patton would make. You know, he makes a bunch of like monkey noises on here, and you know, it's cool. He does like a bunch of like tribal chants and things like that. You know, they're almost like these Apache war cries at points, because he'll go like in the background to create these like soundscapes, and it's really cool, and it's one of my favorite Faith No More songs. It's possibly my favorite Mosley era song. Then you get the And Song, which is somehow dreamy and funky all at once. Yeah. It feels like this cloudy kind of dream kind of thing, and it's almost like he's just reading off a guest list of all of his friends. Yeah,
the lyrics of this song is the lyrics have always made me feel like he just wrote them down as he was thinking of them, and then just sort of figured out how to fit them into sort of a rhythm that goes with it, because they are very like he's just talking pretty much.
Yeah, I will say there's a sincerity that we get from Mosley that I don't think we've ever had from Patton. Because I feel like, from what I've heard and what I've read with personal stories of people that knew Chuck was a very kind of wear his heart on his sleeve kind of guy. He would befriend everyone. He would sleep on anyone's couch. He would, you know, he was fast friends with everyone. He could be a pretty intense cat back in like the 80s, but aside from that, you know, he eventually mellowed out and became a nice guy to be around from what I've heard. He was an eccentric, but from the interview that Podcast Croissant did with that Doug Esper guy, you know, I wish I could have been there for some of this shit, because some of the stories are great. I really recommend that. That's I think it's like the 12th episode. Yeah, I think,
and it's nice in the history of Faith No More. It is nice to know that later on down the line, they included Chuck Mosley in, I think, a few shows where he got up and did a couple songs with them, with Mike Patton. And for some reason, that just makes me happy that, because the fact that he died, if he had died and they had just been estranged and
Yeah.
had never made a connection with the guys again, it would be a little bit heartbreaking. But the fact that he got to do it again, and I feel like Patton really gave him a lot of respect, and I thought that was cool. So
yeah, definitely. They did some full shows with him as well, where they just played stuff off the first two albums.
oh, they did? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, yeah. It was for the re-release of the deluxe edition of We Care a Lot. So when they
so that was recent. That was pretty recent,
Yeah,
right before he died.
Yeah, that you're talking like 2016, I think.
Okay.
So
yeah.
when they did a deluxe reissue of that album, they had him come on stage and do an entire show. No Patton,
I think
just
okay.
Chuck.
I think I remember that now. Okay.
Yeah, which I think is a really cool way. It's a swan song for him. I'd have preferred if he was alive.
Same here.
But that's some serious closure.
It's also nice when
someone.
a band doesn't ignore their past. You
Yeah.
know, like so many bands do that. And I don't care. I don't. Well, I mean, for some reason, my first thought went to Skid Row. I don't know why, because those dudes are all like, we're going to go out on a tour to celebrate this album that some other singer sang on. And I'm like, that dude clearly wants to come sing with you. Just fucking brush that shit under the rug and go do a tour. I mean, because it's like once you get, I feel as a 42-year-old man. There comes a point where you grow the fuck up and everyone just you realize your own faults, you realize your own mistakes, you apologize for your mistakes, you accept the apology for other people, especially when there's a huge fucking part of your life that your life would never be what it was without that. The fact that you're able to just be like, that's not who we are now, man. I'm like, nah, fuck you. I'm not saying you have to change. You don't have to change everything you're doing, but acknowledge it for the people that put you where you are. And so, the Faith No More thing is great just because just bringing Chuck Mosley on board, even though those albums were nowhere near as successful, it's just like, this is where you started. You got all of this shit because of this, where you started. Yeah, that's my rant over.
It's just a nice show of respect for someone who was integral in the early part of the band. Their first two albums, and I feel like Chuck era Faith No More is a different beast because of the involvement of Chuck and his different approach to writing and things like that. But it's still really good, and it's got that core Faith No More sound. And then after Anne's song, holy fuck, we're only on track 2. I just realized.
Sorry about that.
The next episode after this one is going to be a real gusher. We're probably going to spend like 6 hours on just 3 records.
That's why this is the first part of a 4-part episode.
Join us next week when we discuss your top 3.
We're going to do one album per show.
But you've got the follow-up track, Introduce Yourself, which is this punky and energetic thing. I will say I've got a little humorous thing about Introduce Yourself, the song.
Okay.
You know that introduce yourself right on. My Facebook bio says introduce myself right on, because the bio when it asks you to fill in a bio, it says introduce yourself, and I was like, right on.
Yep.
And that's a little nod to one of my favorite bands. But then Chinese Arithmetic.
Yeah.
This is a killer song. Chinese Arithmetic, one of the best Mosley era Faith No More songs. That drum beat coupled, the drum sound on this is really punchy. Whatever Matt was doing with the reverb on this, he made this huge drum sound that, while it still has that distinctly 80s feel, it's very punchy. It's very there in the mix. And in an era where you had these like big stadium reverbs with like a 3-hour-long reverb tail on it, you had this really tight, really in-your-face kind of production that you don't hear a lot at the time.
I agree with that.
And you've got, Oh, as well, fun thing to note, there is a lyric that Chuck repeats twice on this album. I don't know if you've ever noticed it. He uses a lyric from Chinese Arithmetic in R&R.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's the time that you tried to teach your cousin to fart. That one. If you look it up, it's in 2 songs.
Oh wow!
Apparently, it was because he just got lazy with lyrics. Like, that's literally the story behind it.
I'll have to go back and check that out. I don't know why that never stuck out to me before.
Yeah, I didn't notice it either until I, listened to Podcast Croissant dissect the songs from the album. But yeah, it's just one of those weird things. Like, you wouldn't notice it on a casual listen unless you were really picking it apart and making notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, apparently he would come to the studio and write lyrics as he went along, but they were still very sincere, I feel. Whereas, Patton is kind of like this method actor where he'll immerse himself in a character and kind of get to know that character and then write from an outside kind of perspective where he'll here's a white trash guy. Here's a guy that's performing, oral sex on another guy, even though that was Roddy's lyrics. But yeah. Where was I? Death March. Oh shit. I never wrote anything down for Death March.
Great song.
Great song. Heavy. It kind of wake up every night. Duh!
It's very moody.
Yeah. And it's got that almost kind of doom metal dun 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 dun. Dissonant kind of real heavy stop sections, which is cool.
Yeah.
Then you get the better version of We Care a Lot, which takes the original title track of the previous record and makes it really good instead of just good. And then you get this underappreciated gem called R&R.
Oh yeah.
What an absolute fucking ripper of a song, and it never gets talked about. And it's this da 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 da. There's something to be said as well for the guitar work on this, because it's very atmospheric for the kind of thing that Jim Martin would usually play. Yeah. Because he's just doing octaves, whereas usually he'd be like with power chords and stuff.
Well, that's the thing that I think I really like about his guitar playing, because I remember in the past doing a Faith No More video, and people like to chime in and talk about how some of the guitar stuff wasn't written by Jim Martin, and I'm like, I don't really fucking care. It's all about performances. But it's I
think a lot of it was, though, wasn't it? I think that's just a myth.
But it's one of those things where even back in the day, I would notice that sometimes he would do things that really stuck out, and then other times he knew to do something that just blended in with what was already going on. And I guess when you get to Angel Dust, he wasn't happy that he had to do a lot more blending than he did anything else. But I just think that he's really underrated in the fact that he just had a unique style that just lended itself perfectly to really heavy shit, really funky shit without playing funk guitar, or real sort of mellow shit. He could pull it all off. And and since we're talking about R&R and songs like this, it's interesting to me that Introduce Yourself was, by all accounts, or all, whatever, it was a major label album debut. And there is nothing on this album that sounds like a band trying to reach a wide audience. They are still we're going to do whatever odd songs we come up with between the 5 of us. And so R&R is one of those where it's so well done. But I agree, it should be talked about more.
Yeah, it's an underappreciated gem. Unfortunately, it's one of those really good songs that I think the band doesn't like because they've got some kind of negative attachment to it or something. Again, I know too much about Faith No More, so I have an answer for everything on this episode. But apparently there was some bad shit going on when they wrote this, and they all kind of unanimously agreed, it brings up bad memories or some shit. I don't know the specifics, but
interesting.
Yeah. And then you get one of my favorites, the Crab song. My favorite version of this song is the Rockin' Rio 91 version, where Patton introduces the song while Jim's doing it thing. And he comes on and he's like, "This is a sad, sad song. Sad, sad. Do you know what sad is? Sad is like this." And just starts like fake crying on stage before actually going into like the words.
Yeah.
But, you know, instead of that like skit that Chuck kind of does at the beginning, like, "Don't come back. Stay out!" And like with all those like weird little ad-lib parts.
Yeah.
And it's like yeah, it's a really interesting song. And then, you know, I know I'm kind of talking about the Patton version here, but they both had different takes on it. And honestly, that Rockin' Rio 91 version is insane, because like there's a part on the album where he goes, "Cry, does that. Patton does this like straight up cry thing, and I'm like, what is going on? But yeah, love this song. Then you get Blood, which I think is the closest thing you get to something from We Care a Lot, because it has a really, really early to mid 80s synth patch going on. Like, It's very fizzy compared to the more sophisticated kind of synths you get on this album, where it has the most 80s sounding part in it as a song. And it's a really cool song though, and the melodies are really catchy too. But the album closer on this one is this ripper, Spirit, and you get like Spirit and Excellence, and then it's just such a kick-ass. It's such a kick-ass song. I fucking love it. And you know, this album as a whole, these top four, you know, they're all perfect albums in my opinion for their own reasons. You know, and to be honest, you know, a perfect album for me is still allowed to have flaws, because I feel like flaws can give character and make you love it more.
I think every one of my absolute favorite albums of all time, I could pick out things that are not perfect about them or could have been done differently. But eventually, you know, the albums that you love the most, the parts that immediately capture you are always going to be there. But as you get to know the album more, the other parts just become as important as all the other ones. And so, and Faith No More, I think, is a great example of that, because I think that they are one of those bands where even the parts that don't immediately connect with you the first time, as it grows, they become parts that you would never change. So, and I think there's a lot of that on Introduce Yourself for sure.
Definitely.
So, all right. So we on to my number 4 now?
We are on to the last album of this episode.
Okay. So the last album is not Introduce Yourself.
Ooh.
My number 4 is King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime from 1995. And like I said before, We Care a Lot may have been above this one, but this one is a very personal album for me, just because it came out when I was a junior in high school. So I was, 16, 17, something like that. And it came out at a time where popular rock and roll music was getting kind of boring. Pop punk had started to really come in. It hadn't blown up to the point of Blink-182 yet, but Green Day was already in, and a lot of the music that I was watching on MTV and stuff like that around the time, it was all starting to get kind of boring. Yeah. And there were standouts here and there, but for the most part, I remember this was also around the time I started playing in my first band. And so, like, it was a very confusing time for me because there was a lot less that was inspiring me in 1995. And then this album came out and pretty much just blew everything else away that was that was going on at the time. So I was already a huge fan because they had already won me over with The Real Thing and then completely blew my mind with Angel Dust. So I was absolutely ready for this album. And the first thing about this album that unfortunately drags it down a little bit is that there's no Jim Martin. Now it is Trey Spruance from Mr. Bungle, who is an excellent guitar player, and his playing on this is great. Like, it's not, I can't really fault him for any choices he made. And in this particular album, I'm assuming that I don't know if he was involved in the writing process or not, or if he just came in and played the guitar parts that were pre-written. I don't know that, actually.
I think he had a few parts that he brought to the table.
Yeah, I'm sure he put his own spin on things, but anyway, when I first listened to it, that was a thing that stuck out to me. As I'm like, oh, it's the sound is not there for some reason.
Yeah.
The guitar sound that I really loved was not there, but that quickly didn't matter anymore, because the thing that's so great about King for a Day, apart from every other Faith No More album, is that King for a Day is almost like you took Faith No More and you completely dismantled it, and then they put all of the pieces out on the ground for you to look at. This is the widest variety of songs, but instead of incorporating different elements of these different things into one song, it's almost like they're pulled apart. For the first time, you're hearing a song that's just a full-on kind of metal-sounding song, and then a sort of a funky kind of song, and then a loungy song, and a country song. It's like all of these elements were just pulled apart, and they just let them live on their own. So it's like getting a glimpse into the things that make Faith No More tick on their own. So immediately I was like blown away with the fact that an album could feel so cohesive, but at the same time disjointed at times. Because some things really throw you for a loop on this album. And it's got great production, but in this album we get Andy Wallace instead of Matt Wallace, who are not related, but they went for a different Wallace. And Andy Wallace is great because he's one of those guys that you see his name on albums from back in that time period, and you know the shit's gonna sound pretty fucking good.
Oh, good.
And this one does. So on top of we'll get to this in a minute. So I think that when we talk about me having a connection to this album, it's really just what I spoke about, where it was very inspiring. It was an album that came out and really made me look at like, oh, so I don't need to fit into any trend or expectation when it comes to being a music fan, because a lot of my friends at this point had jumped off of metal and were moving to punk and indie. Well, I guess it wouldn't really be called indie rock back then, but I think, that kind of thing. It seemed like everyone was splintering and going different directions, and I was that one holdout that was still like, well, that new Slayer album came out. Did anybody hear? It's like, and nobody fucking cared, but I still did. And the fact that Faith No More put out this album that maintained some of that real heavy metal shit in it, but at the same time just said, there's all these different sides also. It was inspiring as a songwriter and as a guy putting together his first band. I was just like, I don't have to just pick a side. I can grab from wherever I want that inspires me. And so this album, that's why this album sits at number 4, because I hear it and it reminds me of feeling that feeling of, now I want to go write some fucking songs. Like, that's what the album made me feel like. So, but then if I'm going to start picking things apart, we already talked about Jim Martin not being there. Having very little Roddy Bottom keyboard on this album really hurts it, in my opinion. And I don't know where I'm trying to like figure out how to map this out because I'm going to get to a point. So it's got a lot of fucking great song. It is great song after great song after great song. Whatever you expect the next song to be, it's probably not going to be that, but it's going to blow
Yeah.
you away no matter what. You've got Gentle Art of Making Enemies, which is amazing. You've got Cuckoo for Kaka. You got Digging the Fucking Grave, which is like pretty much a perfect song, in my
Yeah.
opinion. And then all of the other little elements that they bring in, like Star AD and Take This Bottle, songs that you're just like, what? Okay, all right, cool, this is great. And it really takes you on this journey where you're surprised at every turn and satisfied at every turn until the last 3 tracks on the album, which to me, the last 3 tracks on the album sound like B-sides. Like they were
Just a Man?
I'll include Just a Man, although I do think Just a Man is a really great album closer. But if you take the song on its own, because if you literally leave out the whole last couple minutes of the song, where obviously the choir kicks in and it's a very big and beautiful ending, but the song itself, it's all very like, okay, it's cool and it's a really good song, but when you're talking about where the album goes, once you pass over the King for a Day song, it then becomes songs that I'm not surprised by. It's songs
Fair.
that sound like something you would have already expected on this particular album. And so and the songwriting, especially on What a Day and whatever the other one is, around that part of the album.
Last to Know.
Last to Know. It's not great songwriting. It's good. They're good songs, but they're not amazing. And so the fact that I feel like the album just overstays its welcome a little bit. Like really you could get rid of those 2 and go into Just a Man, and I would feel it would be much stronger. But this is also talking about, even though I'm saying they sound like B-sides, they're exceptional fucking B-sides. Like they're all great songs. But it's just this thing where the vibe of the album becomes a little more normal. It becomes a little more streamlined at the end, and it's almost like an album that begins. It begins with a bang, and it's just bang after bang, and then it ends with kind of a mumble, like, "Oh, we have these other songs too," kind of thing. And
I feel like it's important to note just really quickly. You say about B-sides. There are a shitload of B-sides for this album too. They had like 20 plus tracks for this era,
Yeah.
All of the B-sides are really cool as well. I gotta say, I'm a Just a Man fan, boy.
I mean, it's one of those songs that once it really kicks in the second half of the song, it's a very powerful song.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it is about the verses, especially, where it doesn't grab me the way that other stuff they've done did, especially on this album. So that's the only reason why I have any kind of gripes, because I'm with you where I think this is a pretty perfect album, and these things that I don't like as much, I don't think at this point I would change them. But when we're picking these albums apart, those songs come up and I go, oh, okay. I feel the album kind of go, at that point. And so, but yeah, because this album is so important to me on a personal level, it's number 4, because it's, as much as I love We Care a Lot, King for a Day is way more of an important album when it comes to my life. And so, it's great, but I mean, I feel like it's so dumb to keep saying this, but like we're talking about these amazing albums. And so every time I gripe about something, I immediately feel like I shouldn't be saying these things.
I think as well, it's a real gift that, even though it's like you say, it's like the album almost outstays its welcome. On the flip side of that, I would say that at least if you kind of tune out towards the end, you've still got something new to discover. Because I found years later, that because I was kind of the same with the ending half of this album, I've actually come to the conclusion of I would actually take What a Day over Digging the Grave. And I would,
okay.
I prefer that song. And I think you find on this album as well that, you know, it's almost like a Noah's Ark, because there's like two of each song, like kind of in a way.
Yeah, I get that.
Because for me, I get a similar vibe from Get Out as I do with Gentle Art. I get a similar vibe from Evidence as I do from Star AD. I get a very similar vibe from Cuckoo for Kaka as Ugly in the Morning. Yeah, there we go. And I feel like...
So you're making a good point there.
Yeah.
But I do think the songwriting strength on those songs, even though they seem that they come from the same area, is there's I don't know. Like you just the album opening with Get Out, like that song is just absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
And it goes into another perfect song with Ricochet. It's just one of those things where it's just it goes from being a 10 out of 10 to a 9.9 out of 10. You know what I'm saying? It's a little bit of a dip with those songs. Cause if What a Day comes on its own, I'm not skipping that song. It's really good. So it's just basically judging these things as complete albums.
I've got a pretty funny analogy as well for Last to Know. Sorry. While we're on it. Last to Know feels like a song that was stolen from Core by Stone Temple Pilots.
It does have a similar vibe.
When this song came on and it gets to that riff, I kind of tuned out to what I was listening to, and I was like, hang on, have I heard this before? And I went over to my iPod and I clicked on it and I was like, holy shit, this is the midsection of Last to Know. I thought this was Stone Temple Pilots for a moment, because it has that kind of I'm hesitant to say doomy, kind of like that early 90s 70s riff revival thing going on.
Yeah. And now that you're mentioning that part of the song, I'm like, that's a cool, you get to hear Roddy's keyboards more in that part. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's a struggle to figure out where things go, but I'm sticking with it. I'm sticking with this being my number 4.
Fair. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to argue at this point because, you know, these top 4 albums, you can't realistically knock them down to anything other than at a minimum they would be an 8.
Yeah.
You know, these are extremely good albums in quality.
Yeah. So, and I do a funny, like a memory that's always attached to King for a Day also is that I around the time this album came out, I got strep throat really bad.
Oh wow!
And I missed school to the point where I actually missed final exams and had to go make them up. I was so sick. And what I did that entire time was I laid in my bed and repeatedly listened to this album over and over again, because for some reason it was comforting, but at the same time it was making my brain be very active because I was trying to get my head around the whole thing. So,
mind if I ask what medium you were listening to it on? Was it a CD or a tape?
It was a CD. By 1995, everything was CDs. I got my first CD player in 1992. And so at that point, I was like, I would only buy a cassette if I absolutely couldn't afford to buy a CD and I wanted the album really bad. But no, for the most part, everything was CDs at this point. But yeah, it was on my Sony console CD player that I listened to it. So cool. So there we go. That's our bottom 4 for that is it for part 1 of Faith No More, and we will be joining you again next time for our top 3 Faith No More albums. And as you saw here, we will talk at great length about them, especially once we get into this top 3. So yeah, on that note, let's just get the fuck out of here. And then Thank you all for listening, and feel free to comment what you think about Faith No More and these albums. And please join us next time for the part 2 of Faith No More. Any last words before you sign out?
I just want to say, there's one specific album I have in mind that's probably going to account for like 3/4 of the next episode.
If it's the same one, then I think I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
All right, let's not give anything away. All right, so
Right
folks, thank you very much for listening to Cranked and Ranked. We will see you next time. Take us out, Eddie.
Later, dude.